Hello, and welcome everyone to our May Roundtable. We are back with our best, John Pisalis of Velocity Realty in Toronto,
Hello again.
and our friend Steve Saretsky in Vancouver with Oaken Realty. How are you doing, Steve?
Doing well, doing well. Despite the
We're-
market, yeah, lots to touch on, but doing well.
Steve, the
so
rumor is you went down to Omaha. Potentially, I'm wondering if you were trying to sell Warren Buffett some pre-con condos when you were
Yeah,
down there.
Buffett is going to do the next bailout, just like Home Capital. He's going to start buying up all these pre-cons and save the Toronto housing market.
The
Beautiful.
final play. Oh my goodness.
You heard it here first.
So he didn't name you successor, Steve, while you were down there?
No, no. I'm like this next janitor at Berkshire.
Hardly.
But
Come on.
Canadian
yeah,
janitor.
no, unfortunately not. Yeah, it's cool. It's a good event though. Like 19,000 people. It's kind of like it's crazy. It's like a cult following, like a religion they have, right? I mean, like what other company attracts 19,000 people to its AGM? So,
It's his
Wow.
style, man. He's like a bit of a character. I think that's what makes it. I mean, and obviously he's a legend, but yeah.
Well,
well,
I
yeah, we
think,
were we were kind of
yeah,
chatting about that, right? Which is like, oh, like people will sit there for 5 hours listening to this old guy talk and answer Q&A. And I was like, well, I just don't think the next CEO is going to be able to hold an audience for 5 hours.
different times. Like
Yeah.
honestly, the cultural influence of Buffett in that whole, 80s and 90s when I think investing and the thought of investing became a lot more commonplace
hmm
amongst average citizens. Like I think that's one of the things that his legacy will have introduced, right?
hmm Yeah,
So,
100%.
yeah. All
Some good
right.
quotes on him from on housing.
There are good quotes.
Not like just not from that event, but
Yeah.
he touched on it briefly, but more so just in the past.
Isn't he the one about you know who's swimming naked once the tide's out? Is that his line, I think?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, yeah. He's got some good ones. He's got
Speaking
some
of
fun.
which, should we turn to the Toronto real estate market?
Lots of people swimming naked in Toronto.
I'm looking for a
Lots.
segue. John, let's start with you. Let's get a
Mm.
market update about Toronto, the different segments, the condo, the pre-con, the resale sales, sorry, and then low rise. What are the numbers saying?
Oh my. So I mean, this was the first year or the first month, I'd say, where we've had a somewhat meaningful decline in prices. I mean, for the last maybe 2, 3 months, we've had modest declines, 2%, 3%, 1%. But in April, low-rise home prices, so that's like detached semis, townhomes, we're down about 6% year over year. New active listings up 45%, sales down, about 4.5 months of inventory, so pretty sluggish market. I haven't dug into the data too closely, but based on the past couple of months, we were seeing a bit of a difference between City Toronto, in particular Central Toronto, versus the suburbs. So the suburbs were performing far more slowly. And I'd say to some extent that includes Toronto's inner suburbs, like of Scarborough, East Scarborough, and Etobicoke. Whereas central Toronto has been still relatively busy and relatively comparative. I mean, we have clients who are looking, and the market's competitive. There's like bidding wars, and they're like, "What the hell's going on?" I thought the market's slow, and I'm like, "Yeah, but you want to buy, in the beach. You want to buy in Leslieville. You want to be like in a central neighborhood, right on the subway. Those homes have competition still, even in a crap market." So I think it's confusing for people, but yeah, I'd say we're seeing these different trends. And again, low rise probably in the suburbs is taking a bigger hit. Condo market, similar. About I think average prices down in the condo market around 7% year over year. We got about 7 months of inventory, which is quite high for the GTA. So very sluggish market. Smaller units, of course, we have even more than 7 months. Like that is the slowest market, whereas larger units are moving a little bit better. So again, it's a very slow market right now. Sales are terrible. Again, I think a lot of uncertainty, people reluctant to buy. The investor bid is dead. Really, it's only one who kind of needs a house that's kind of buying right now. And you mentioned pre-construction. I'm thinking pre-construction condos are going to be dead for years. I mean, I don't see anyone buying these anytime soon. I think any of those projects that are in the pipeline are probably going to convert to rentals because there's no way those numbers are going to make sense anytime soon.
Wow. So first time we've seen a price drop for low rise, right?
First time in a while. I mean, we
In
saw
a long
that
time, yeah.
decline kind of in 2022, right? But like
During a
since
global
then,
pandemic.
yeah, since then it's been relatively stable.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we're starting to see a bit of a dip as a result of like this elevated inventory and weak sales volumes.
So that answers a question I've been asking you guys for a while, which is when are prices finally going to drop? One more question for you, John, before we go to Steve.
Mm.
If Warren Buffett isn't going to buy all these micro condos in Toronto, what's going to happen? You're talking about the projects that are in the pipeline. That's one thing you can maybe convert.
Mm.
What is going to happen with all these micro condos sitting on the market? A friend of mine asked me, would they combine units? Because, my girlfriend and I would be interested, but these units are so small.
Yeah. That's a good, I've had a few people ask me. I mean, the reality is, even if you combine them, the numbers still don't make sense. Like you're paying too high of a price per square foot. You're better off just going and buying a 1,200 square foot unit rather than merging two 600 square foot units.
Right.
And the
No
reality
savings
is,
there.
doesn't make sense.
No.
And it's hard to do. Like in most projects, you can't really do it because there's amenities between the walls. It's not so easy as like a home where you just rip down a wall. Even if it has plumbing, you reroute it. It's not like a house. You can't
You
just
poo-pooed
reroute
my
stuff.
idea though, in the height of the Toronto market. I thought we should buy semi-detaches and just join them as
Oh yeah, I
citizens to
know.
get freehold.
Okay, I mean, so jokes aside, I know someone who's telling me this at one point who did a major reno in his condo, tore down walls, didn't even ask the condo corp. I think I met him after he did it. And I'm like, what did you do here? And then basically what he did is where he wanted to make his kitchen open concept. I mean, I guess it's less relevant today because no one has telephones, but all the phone lines for the whole building ran through where he wanted to kind of open it up. So what he did is he hired someone to kind of reroute it, and which means snipping the line, freaking taping it up, and like rerunning it around so you can have this open concept kitchen. I'm like, you're crazy, buddy. If anyone finds out, you're the one that is responsible for fixing that. But so in short, yeah, you can't just rip down walls in condos.
All right. Steve, what is the story like in Vancouver? Again, overall, and then in the different segments. In your case, it's more different areas as well, I understand.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe, I mean, I think obviously Vancouver, Toronto tends to follow like a similar pattern, which is, it's so segmented today. I think that it's kind of like the ongoing theme that we've been talking about on this show for many months now, which is like the things that sort of went up the most, I feel like are correcting the most. So that's kind of like outer suburbs in particular are getting hit hard. Basically, I mean, I think that the simple question is like for anyone that's trying to understand like the broad strokes of the market, you can basically say like where are the investors most prevalent, and wherever they were the most prevalent is where they are now correcting the most. So it's small units, particularly out in the suburbs. Prices literally doubled over, I think, 5 or 6 years. So those are now going through a painful correction. Inventory is at all-time record highs in the Fraser Valley, which is like your suburban markets in Vancouver. Downtown market's still really, really weak. But if we look at the overall sales numbers for Greater Vancouver, they were down 23% on a year-over-year basis. Not the lowest we've ever seen, but John, like if I take January, February, March, April, so now we've got, a good 4 months worth of data here. And if I look at total sales, it's the lowest over the past 20 years. We're off to the slowest start outside of 2020, which was kind of the start of the pandemic. And then for whatever reason, 2019 was actually the lowest. I actually, which was why I was going to ask you, is like, do you remember, like, I'm trying to remember why early 2019 was so soft.
So, I mean, for us, it was a bit different because we had a bit of a bubble in 2017, market crashed, and then 2018 and 2019 were slow years in the Toronto area because we
Did you
had
not have
the
the
foreign
foreign
buyer
buyer
tax.
tax?
Yeah, foreign buyer tax around 2017. And then
That's what it was.
prices tanked about 20% between like February of 2017 and like July. And then they just flatlined and like people were frozen and the market was
Okay.
sluggish.
Now I'm starting to remember. So I think 2018 was when the BC NDP government got elected,
Mm.
and they obviously got elected on a platform that was like anti, anti-housing, anti-real estate investor. So they brought in the BC speculation tax, which is basically a tax targeted at foreigners. I remember that killed the market. I think we also had the stress test, right, in 2018.
Oh yeah, that's right. Actually, that's a good point. Yes, I think that came in right around 2018. Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah, so I think
Yeah.
it kind of just like dragged that market in 18, and people were obviously pessimistic in the early days of 19. So, anyways, long story short is this is essentially the third weakest start in the last 20 years, and I'm just not seeing a whole lot of signs of life. Listings are still above longer term averages. So I think the kind of the difference between, let's say, this year and 2024, 2023, or even 2022 when rates were like spiking was we actually had like pretty anemic listings. I think what happened is like people saw that the market was not very good and they just decided not to list, and they decided, hey, I'm going to hold out for another year and market will turn around. And I think this year we're actually seeing like we're finally seeing sort of the capitulation moment, which is a lot of people just saying, hey, you know what? Like I got to sell, and maybe it's I've got two condos and I need to sell one of them, but we're just seeing like the new listing numbers continue to trend slightly above normal. And obviously, sales and demand is well below long term historical averages. So, what you have essentially is a scenario where inventory is just stacking up, right? It's like instead of condos selling in, let's say, 2 weeks, like now they're taking 2 or 3 months. And so, like, the longer it takes to sell, the more inventory just slowly kind of keeps building and building as the new stuff keeps coming to market. And so, I just feel like, yeah, you look at months of inventory, Honda Space has just over 6 months, which again, historically is it's high.
Mhm.
And that doesn't include like all the pre-sale stuff, which is kind of that shadow inventory market.
Yeah.
So,
And I mean, the trends are the same in the GTA. Like compared to last year was a relatively busy-ish start to the year. And if you look at the numbers, yeah, sales are down 17%, but it's where active listings and new listings are like through the roof, right? So the supply's back. And like to Steve's point, I think we've been talking about this and hearing this for years. Like a lot of people asking us, when a list, when's the market going to rebound? I just want to hold out, and I think our general sentiment over the past while has been like the market's not surging anytime soon. Like if you want to wait, it's not about waiting 6 months. You got to wait years. You know what I mean? And that's kind of playing out now because now's the market is getting a little more sluggish depending on where you are, especially in some of the suburban markets.
so I'm just looking at the stats right now, 51. Um, if I take, okay, so here's a good example for people. So if you go back to 2005, right? So if you look at the last 20 years of data and we say, show me the number of new listings that have come to the market during the first 4 months of this year, right? So remember, I just told everyone that, it was the third fewest sales in 20 years for those first 4 months. Now, if I look at the inverse of that, which is new listings, there's one, two, three, four. So this is the fifth most number of new listings in the last 20 years. We're about 33% above that 20-year average to start the year for the first 4 months. So new listings are obviously running well above sort of these normal levels, and demand is running well below it.
So for lay people, this might be answer to another question. When can people stop holding on and have to start selling? Are we starting to see that? Or is this different? This is people thinking things could get worse. Maybe I should list now. Which is it? Is it people just sort of running out of the ability to hang on to if these are investments? What is the story, do you think?
I think that's part of it. I mean, I did look at some of the data. Definitely, when we look at the number of new listings, it is a big increase in the number of investors selling. And I mean, this is just an estimate. Like we can look at that by occupancy. I mean, if a listing is advertised as being owner occupied, it's owner occupied. If it's vacant or tenanted, it's usually as a rental property or was a rental property. And those are up significantly over last year and the year before. So yeah, I think some have been holding out and waiting for the market to improve. And some are just kind of throwing in the towel and saying, listen, we just got to move on now for sure. And it's a tough market. I mean, we've been talking about this for a while. Like, I mean, Steve and I, like, there are people who are just bleeding cash, like just so deeply negative on their investment properties now. And they don't know, do we sell at a slight loss or just keep forking out a couple grand a month? And some are just kind of throwing in the towel probably and just deciding to list and cut their losses.
I
I
think the
sus
other thing to add to that, John, it's really interesting. I mean, obviously, like you and I do our best to put out information, consult people. I think we try to like, I think I'm sure you and I kind of work from like a similar basis of like how we work with our clients, which is to say, like I think we look at it more as like an advisory approach.
Mhm.
And so it's interesting just to sort of see sort of the common pitfalls of like sellers, which is to say, like, oh, we've had no showings in 30 days. Well, like, let's just leave it. Like, we don't want to do a price reduction, or like, the common one, I think, and whether it's this year or like last year or the year before, a lot of the conversation has been, well, let's take it off and try again next year. Right. And it's like, okay, well, like, I think if you followed through with that strategy, I mean, so far 2025 is worse than 2024 and it's worse than 2023. And I'd argue almost getting to the point of maybe worse than where 2022 was at.
Yeah, for sure.
And like,
Listen,
I think everyone's just so short-sighted that everybody just assumes that the market's going to snap back. And not necessarily like pricing, but like it's just going to snap back next year.
I think we have this, strong recency bias where Canadians are not used to seeing the housing market sluggish, and they're used to it maybe slowing down for a year or two and then rebounding again, like stronger than ever. And that's why I think on our segments in the fall, October, November, December, the sentiment I was feeling on the ground, we probably talked about it, was that people were jumping back in because they thought the market was going to rip now, like this spring, right? Rates are going to be lower. People are going to jump back in. And again, that was the sentiment. And maybe it would have if Trump wasn't in power, because like part of this is
Mhm.
economic uncertainty, all of this stuff that has pushed people to the sidelines. I don't think the market would have ripped this spring, to be clear. I think it probably would have been a little bit busier if he was not leading, but I think people have that mindset that the market's just going to rebound very quickly.
Um, I think that that was literally actually the commentary, John, from CREA, Canadian Real Estate Association, their April stats package they put out.
Okay.
So they're from their chief economist literally said that exact basic thing. He says, quote, in short order, we've gone from a slam dunk rebound year to treading water at best.
Yeah, it's kind of true. And
Well,
yeah, exactly what we're seeing.
yeah. I mean, in defense of Canadians, it took a pandemic to get our market going again.
Hmm.
And before that, a subprime mortgage collapse in the US didn't stop us.
Hmm.
So I actually myself was wondering when is it going to take off again? Because that's how we react, it seems, to the most disastrous conditions. But that brings me to my next question which is the effect of what's happened. And I think we can't talk about Donald Trump coming in November without talking about what a change to the Canadian elections and the landscape it made. Because had that event not happened, you wouldn't even have seen maybe the result that we just saw. So
Hmm.
let's turn to the Canadian elections. So this is very interesting. You're coming into a moment where whether you liked it or not, people kind of knew where we were going last
Hmm.
fall.
Yeah, it's true. You're
And
right.
right. And so not only does Trump come in, but it really upends the Canadian elections, right? The
Hmm.
front runner who everyone thought across the country was definitely going to get in, the conservatives, and everything flip-flops. So now we have the election results in. The Liberals are back in with a minority government, short of 3 seats. But the Conservatives did very well, obviously showing a lot of strength in Western Canada and seeing that East-West divide really pronounced now. It's
Hmm.
basically blue and red. And in the 905, the suburbs of Ontario, performing very well.
Hmm.
So again, we were thinking of December, January, there's going to be a landslide win for one party. Now we're in this mixed government situation. What do you both think this is going to mean for housing?
I mean, John, I don't know what your thoughts. I don't think it's gonna do anything really. I mean, I think it's nice to have some certainty about at least, who's going to be in power, I guess, for the next 2 to 4 years. But I mean, I guess so that's maybe like one thing that Canadians can kind of move on from in terms of uncertainty. But I just don't think there's a lot the federal government can do at this stage for housing. I mean, I think that the economic wins are what they are, and there's no reviving like the pre-construction market. Yeah, John, I don't know. I just don't know, like, whether it's the conservatives or the liberals that are running this country. I just don't think they're in a position that the wheels are in motion.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is extreme. I mean, I agree, Steve. I mean, it doesn't really matter who's leading. I don't think when a housing market becomes so insanely unaffordable, I don't think policymakers can do very much to change that. I'm speaking about like home ownership. Rentals are a little bit different. Um, the only thing that's going to change that are just natural market forces, which is kind of what we're seeing now, right? Uh, Relatively high interest rates, relatively high prices, economic uncertainty, kind of pushing prices down. You kill the investor bid. The only people buying homes now are people who need it for shelter and for family or whatever. Um, and the market's just gradually grinding down, right? And I
Which
think,
is like, John, I think we are getting like that affordability is slowly returning, and it's returning really on its own, right? Which is to say that, prices are correcting uh as they should, and rates have come down. So like we're getting more, and obviously given the pipeline of new units that are completing over the next, call it, 2 years, I mean, it's wise to think that affordability should improve at least modestly. Um,
But the
but I
problem is
think,
if that affordability is improving on the back of economic uncertainty,
mhm,
right? So it's not a boom in supply, it's not something else. And I wonder if we've put this, if this election has actually helped put that clarity. I think the Trump question is there still.
mhm,
And now we have, for the layperson, myself, a Canadian, I'm wondering about the West and the East, and there's, real discontent from Alberta to the point of talking about national unity problems to the extent that we saw from Quebec a decade ago. I mean,
mhm,
over a decade ago. I mean, these things are really worrying.
mhm.
They're very Canada specific. It's almost like our own tailored pandemic now hitting us. The
Yeah.
two things that we're so vulnerable on, which is our relationship with the US and our national unity, we're being hit on them. So I'm wondering what you think about the economic outlook in this case, and then going back to the question of buyer sentiment in the real estate market.
I
Are we
mean,
just in a totally new era?
one thing I'll expand on, I touched on earlier, even though the market's cooling now, and I said kind of somewhat naturally, it's kind of not natural because had Trump not won, or if we had version one of Trump and not this version of Trump, the economy would not be where it was. Economic uncertainty would not be where it was. Home sales would not be as low as they are, and home prices probably wouldn't have been down 6, 7%. They may be down 2%. So I think a lot of this is somewhat manufactured, right? South of the border. It is a short-term phenomenon. And, once we have some clarity, and it's very possible that you have this Canadian mindset that the market might rebound. You have a lot of pent-up demand still, people who want to move but can't. So again, I think this adjustment, I don't think is a structural shift down, I think is my point. And in particular for low rise, micro condos, completely different market. That might be a little bit longer term, but
yeah,
houses.
that's a fair point, John. I'll give you like a real life example. I was like literally happened this week where we chatting with a prospective home buyer. They've been sort of actively looking, and I get a text message, yesterday being like, "Oh, I've got to pause my house search," and they're actually in the film industry in Vancouver, right? And so of course, Trump's tweeting and saying, "Well, any movie that's not made in America is going to have a 100% tariff." I don't know how that works, but and whether or not that policy actually goes through or comes to fruition, I think unlikely. But the reality is like it's creating that uncertainty, right? To the point where a prospective home buyer literally says, "Well, like maybe it'll happen, maybe it won't happen, but he's threatening it. And like, I don't want to make $1 million decision
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then find
John
out
and
my
I are
business. Yeah.
John and I are in the heartland of the Toronto
Film industry.
film industry in Leslieville. You know, all my friends at the tennis club, so many people involved. Of course, you hit pause.
Hmm.
You know, you and so that is maybe the question for both of you. Does this run out of steam eventually? Like, how many industries can he threaten? Does he calm down eventually? What do you guys think for the rest of the year? Or is it really hard to tell? Uh, and it's a new paradigm where you can't really make bets because they're really predicated on one person's strategy.
Yeah. Steve, do you want to
I don't
start?
know. Yeah, I mean, hard to say. I mean, my view is obviously that like he's in power for the next 4 years. So I mean, at some point, Canadians will have to sort of digest it, and hopefully, at least you get a little bit more stability on that side of the border. But yeah, I mean, I think I said clearly we're just seeing it. But I mean, coming back to the original conversation though, in terms of like structural, I agree. Like the demand is I think in the short term impaired on policy that can flip quite easily. I still think on the supply side, though, I think structurally, I think we're going to be well supplied for the next few years because I think what happened is if you look at any of the pre-sale data or any of the construction data, we built and pre-sold a lot of units during the pandemic, and now they're all completing and adding to, and coming back earlier to the new, prime minister is what they've promised is, when they talk about all these housing supply targets, I mean, really most of their policy strategies around building more rental housing.
Hmm.
So I think that's an important distinction. I mean, does it drive rents lower over time if you actually get an uptick? I mean, but John, that's an investor, right? Like if you're a pre-con investor and the government saying, well, we're going to keep pushing more and more capital towards the rental space to try
Yeah.
to ensure this product keeps getting built. I don't think it's very bullish for rents.
It's not. I mean, and this is again, we have so much inventory in the pipeline that are condos, which are effectively going to be rentals, in an environment where non-permanent resident growth in Canada is going to be negative, which effectively means you're shrinking the number of people who are going to want to rent because there's just going to be fewer people. And you're right. Listen, I think over the next few years, we're going to have a decent amount of supply. What, 3+ years down the road looks like is another story. But Ermi, like circling back to your point about kind of the outlook, like I think, listen, and I think I've talked about this on the show. Like, I think for the real estate markets to recover, you're gonna need like 4, 5, 6 months of Donald Trump behaving like a normal leader of a massive country, like the normal president would.
Or
And
just getting
that,
tired and golfing more.
yeah,
Like
exactly. And
maybe
that
just doing
means
less.
that means coming up with a trade deal and
Mhm.
not posting random tweets on a Sunday afternoon about the latest sector you want to slap 100% tariff on. Like, and this is what makes it insane. Like, it just seems impulsive, irrational. Like, it just woke up and decided, I'm just going to slap 100% tariff on film today. And
No,
you
I think
don't,
it's because he golfed with John Voight.
may,
No,
I've read
seriously.
that. I think you're
It's
right.
his minister of film now.
But,
But yeah, I think
um,
I think personal relations really drive him.
mhm,
I get the sense that if you get a chance to lobby or get an ear,
mhm.
you can really make your case for what's really important to you.
Yeah.
And I get the sense that sways him a lot,
But
right?
again, I think as long as he's volatile and just like
Mhm.
randomly tweeting about new terror, I mean, I don't think
Yeah.
anyone's going to come back in any significant numbers anytime soon. That's just my
Yeah.
instinct.
It's not like he has a list of, okay, by magnitude, the industries that affect the United States, and he's meticulously going through them and targeting his plan to bring
Exactly.
back
I
manufacturing. Because I
well,
think he is a relationship person.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah.
I think unpacking this all in the housing market though, like what you're seeing is who are the people that are actually like make so in this uncertain environment and we don't know what's going to happen. It really comes down to like the people that are transacting this market are people that need to transact. So if you don't need to transact, you're like, well, I can wait a year, or I don't need another investment property. You're not just not transacting, which makes sense. The people that I'm seeing that are transacting, it's often like young families where they've outgrown their space, or they're relocating for various reasons. Maybe it's work related, and so like that's a transaction that needs to happen. And that's why I think, to John's point, was we talked about earlier, is the markets that seem to be holding up the best are kind of those like entry level type of houses, particularly in the inner city. It's like, well, the family that needs that third bedroom that's coming out of their 2 bedroom condo, like that segment is holding up.
Yeah. Because we were talking about this, John, on our consumer segment. It's the one product class that will always be in demand,
And we're not
right?
building it. Exactly.
And we're
We're
not
not
building, and
building
we
it. Three
can't,
bedroom homes. Yeah.
which will actually turn to a story before we get off this point. We're going to talk about how fourplexes haven't been taking off the way people thought. But um, on this issue, I'm just wondering about one other issue, which is the immigration surge really is one of the biggest drivers of our supply increase over the last little while. You know, investors got so excited because rents were going up so high because we had this temporary immigration bulge. And we saw that before Donald Trump was elected. And I think John's point is a good one. And it was Trump 2.0,
Mhm.
not the first one. We saw the conservatives were probably likely to go to a very big victory, and that is just because the immigration sentiment has really changed in Canada. So even though
Mhm.
the liberals have come back into power, we had some people saying, well, you know, immigration, they'll loosen up again. I don't know, because the one thing about Carney is he's pretty wonkish and smart, and I think it would be pretty hard to go down that destructive route very quickly. Now, in time, maybe. What does that mean if a surge that will not return built this whole category of housing?
A surge in immigration
Yeah,
or growth.
yeah, yeah.
Listen, I think,
Like the bottom's coming out of, we're talking about micro condos, but also rentals, you know, both surged on the
yeah.
back of this temporary immigrant
So,
bulge.
I mean, listen, I think this is one of the reasons I've been pretty critical about Canada's approach to building housing, which is effectively selling off condos to investors. I don't think it's smart because what ends up happening is what exactly we're experiencing today. And I wrote this one like 4 years ago, I think. I was looking at a blog post. When that happens, exuberance takes over. You overbuild what the speculative frenzy wants, and then you end up oversupplied of these 500 square foot units when you kind of really need 3 bedroom homes. And that's where we are, right? That's exactly, I mean, this is like kind of predictable. It's not like this is the first time this has happened. Most housing markets work like this, right? And what's going to happen to the micro condos, I don't know, but this is partly why I think most economists I speak with are somewhat less concerned about prices falling very much for low rise. You know, even though they're down a little bit, it's to your point. We're not building it. It's the one segment of the market that there's just no new inventory. The supply is tight. And we got to remember, even though Canada's population growth in theory is going to be zero for 2 years, like if they go by their numbers, it doesn't mean immigration is zero. Immigration, which are permanent residents, will still be up 450 a year. It's just going to be negative because the non-permanent residents will be declining by that much, right? So and the permanent residents are not renting 400 square foot condos. Like they generally need larger spaces when they first move here because they have families, and eventually will be buying larger homes. So again, I think how this all plays out, and to your point about Carney pivoting on immigration, I don't know. I think Canadians have serious PTSD of this freaking immigration issue because for years the experts told us not to worry about it. It's sustainable. We just got to upzone and legalize fourplexes, and our whole housing crisis will be solved. And we listened to that for years until basically people are like, this doesn't make sense. And because the people stopped believing the housing experts is why the government pivoted in 2024. It's not because the housing economists all of a sudden said this is too much, right? That's my experience. It's
The people
the
is
people got
the
pissed,
I remember
people. Yes.
Christopher
right?
Freeland was actually saying back in the heyday, she was saying, "Oh, we need the immigration because we need to import all these construction workers to
Yeah.
build the houses for the people that were
They
coming."
never did.
Yeah.
But it's funny because I think Benjamin Tal was the one that put out the report showing that the share of the immigrants that were coming into the country as a percentage of them, it was actually that were
Nothing.
going into the construction sector was actually declining.
Yeah, my God.
So I mean, but to the whole immigration stuff, ironically, it's like, well, there's even if the government was to change their policy and say, okay, we actually want to ramp it back up, there's no jobs today for these immigrants. I mean, we
It's
know
true.
Well,
that.
there's no Ponzi scheme college degree set up either,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah,
one of
I
the
mean that's kind of
biggest,
unwinding. But like
right?
you look at youth unemployment, you look
Yeah,
at all these
yeah,
like the new immigrants that are coming here, the unemployment rate for them is actually very high. So I would argue that
no.
a lot of them will, if you can't find work and put food on the table, you might have to leave.
Yeah.
The biggest surge I think can be tied to that really like dubious, weird degree
College.
mill
Yeah.
transferring into low paid jobs.
Hmm.
And that seemed to be the play that has been clamped down on. I agree with both of you that it wasn't the politicians, it was the people that really got fed up and across the
Hmm.
board and even in the center and places that kind of are the last to admit therapy, they're traumatized by it. And that's why I think the current government, especially since they're in minority position
Hmm.
anyways, they'll have a hard time on that. And actually, this is one issue on which Canada is relatively united. There's not a lot of strong desire to see that again in Quebec. They're
Hmm.
actually very cautious about immigration. So this is the one sort of factor. So what does this mean for housing? So low rise, pretty protected. All this pre-con, you keep saying you can't make it into bigger units. What's going to happen? Are prices going to really fall until they clear?
I think in the micro segment, very possibly. Like, I think they just don't make sense. Who's buying them? Like, they're so slow right now. Like, I looked at downtown. I think we have like 13 months of inventory of, I'm not even exaggerating, of like units that are smaller than 500 square feet because no one's buying them. Like,
Oh, I
it
gotta
just,
look at downtown now.
so yeah, I think you might see because the only person who's really buying those right now are investors, right? And there just aren't a lot of investors buying. So, you either hold onto it and bleed cash, right, as an investment property, or you sell it at a slight discount. So, yeah, I
Yeah, I
think
mean, if you look
it's
at that single family, it'd be like, yeah, I mean, in Vancouver, anyways, there's no like in the city of Vancouver, there's no more land to like that you can just find. Like, oh, there's just an empty parcel over there. Let's just go and build a new community of single family houses. So, well, I mean, if you're gonna build a new single family house, I mean, the land alone for like a standard sized lot, 4,000 square foot lot, just call it $2 million. It's another $1 million to construct the house, and then the developers obviously want their profit, and they got to pay their taxes and their profit and the realtor fees. So these houses sell for 3.5. So like just don't build new houses because like there's not a huge market for $3.5 million homes. So what's happening is, of course, is as these cities now densify and say, okay, instead of single family, let's do a duplex because we can sell each duplex for 1.8 million aside. It's a much larger buyer pool, but it kind of puts a floor underneath the land price.
mhm.
Well, let's talk about that competition, I guess, for that low-rise house and whether this fourplex or this change is really panning out. A big story in Etobicoke, inner suburb of Toronto. Actually, Doug Ford's, I guess, homeland,
Mhm.
has just turned down at the city council level, so it's Toronto City Council level, a proposal to build two fourplexes side by side. I'm putting the picture up right here. This seems a bit odd, John. This seems like where you would want to densify. And now we have the city that was pro densification voting against it.
The
What's
city
going
of
on?
Toronto doesn't know what the hell they want. They legalize fourplexes everywhere. Now they're kind of having a hard time accepting applications when there are two fourplexes side by side, because now those are like apartment buildings. First it was they were worried if two semis, one side of the semi was 4 units, the other side of the semi was a 4 units, even though they were separate owners. If you're the second person applying, they'd be like, nope, 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 because that whole structure has 8 units. That's an apartment building now. It's just mind blowing. So the story in the Star which is also mind blowing. As someone who severed two lots, and from what I saw briefly, is they're detached properties. We're going to build two fourplexes, one on one detached lot, one on another. And the city's like, nope, nope, we're not allowing it. Why? Because I mean, the neighbors are like, it's going to destroy the neighborhood and so on and so forth. So it's insane. It's insane. I think it is. I mean, I don't listen. I'm all for high density. People should, and some I have clients who disagree. Obviously, they don't want fourplexes in their neighborhood, which I respect. But I mean, I think in a growing city, I think you need it.
It's
This was going to be on a busy street too, which is what killed
yeah.
me. Like if on
You
any
know,
street, you're going to have them on busier roads. Like,
it's funny, John, because in the most established neighborhoods of Toronto, like Rosedale or Leaside, you see the apartments and the walk-ups
oh
on the
yeah, there
periphery
are. Yeah,
of those
100%.
very prestigious detached home neighborhoods on the
Yeah,
main avenues.
yeah. Rosedale's got multiplexes.
Rolled at least
Annex
so
has
it's
tons. Yep.
yeah, that's kind of where they should go. So it's
Yeah.
kind of strange that they can't even make a breakthrough on something that is pretty reasonable.
It is weird because, like you said, I mean, I think it's like this stigma in some ways is new. Like you said, they're multiplexes in high-end neighborhoods in Toronto, Rosedale, the Annex, in High
Mhm.
Park. Like, these are relatively affluent areas, and the neighborhoods have not gone to the toilet, which is what everyone worries is going to happen. They're just nice rentals in the most
And
cases.
they're the nicer walk-ups, like very
Yeah.
beautiful older,
So, but the city's just responding to people's complaints. And I don't know, Steve, are you guys getting pushback with multiplexes in Vancouver?
No. So the multiplex stuff is just taking off now. Just looking at the map while I've got it up here, but we have about 350 units in the development permit application. So there's a lot coming. Obviously, the city of Vancouver. So what I'll say is this. So the BC government created legislation about a year ago saying every city in the province of British Columbia has to allow a minimum of 4 units, I believe, on a lot in BC. Now, most of these cities haven't really actually complied, or they've made it very economically unviable. So there's actually only so far from what I've seen, there's really only like two cities where the numbers actually make sense and the cities have actually fully embraced the idea of multiplexes, and that's City of Vancouver and City of Burnaby. So those are kind of your two. Other than that, like basically, like this again, either the cities haven't complied or they've kind of put some breakers on it where no one's just going to build them. I think where it gets even more interesting is, yeah, there's some pushback in terms of like people obviously aren't happy about like, oh, there's very limited parking in a lot of these units. But where you're actually seeing where it's interesting is to sort of see the natural market and where it can absorb these units. So, for example, like the city of Vancouver, it's divided between the west side and the east side. Obviously, the east side is more affordable. It's more of the families are going, and you're seeing a lot more absorption and construction of these multiplexes on the east side because there's first of all there's a lot less NIMBYism, but there's just a natural demand on the east side. Whereas if you go to the west side, it's like, well, people on the west side, they're buying $4 and $5 million homes for a reason. It's because they want a big single family house and they want to
To
be
get
left
away
alone.
from the east side.
Yeah, exactly. So like the market is just having, I think, a tougher time breaking in to that segment. So I am kind of curious to see how this develops over the next 3 to 5 years.
Yeah. Yeah, very interesting. So as we sign off, I want to ask each of you to tell me the one thing you're looking for in terms of something to change or something that would, the kind of piece of data or the event that you're looking at this month that would inform you a little bit about where housing's going.
And the trends in the data?
Or just an event. Is it interest rates? Is it, something we see? I mean,
I mean, I'm probably I'm curious to see if we get some clarity on our trade with the US over the next 30 days, like something that looks like some ironed out, reasonable path towards stability I think is the most important thing that I'm looking at. And again, we don't know for sure because he could wake up one day golfing and decide to slap a tariff on whatever. But I think, and the outcome, like, I mean, they're meeting this week. How do those play out? How does that play out over the next 30 days? I think we'll get a good sense for it. We're not going to have 100% clarity, but I think the tone from the US and from Trump, I think is going to matter a lot. And I think is probably the most important thing I'm keeping an eye on.
The new Trump Carney dynamic.
Yeah.
Steve?
Well, Rich, my co-host of the Loonie Hour there, seems to think that a trade deal will be struck relatively quickly. We'll see. Obviously, if that's the case, John, I'd be looking for like showing activity.
Mhm.
I think you gotta. I think as soon as you start to see like a good uptick in showing activity, that's usually a good indication that people are getting off the sidelines and are going to start putting in offers. And as of right now, I'd say showing activity is pretty anemic. It's a snail's pace of what it used to be. I'll give you like what we're telling our clients today is kind of the norm. Is like if you're getting one private showing request a week, that's about right. That's about right.
Wow, that's wild.
Yeah, one showing a week is kind of the norm. So, we're used to, I don't know, if you have a new listing come on, maybe 4 to 5 showings a week would be kind of the norm. So, I mean, right now I'd say, yeah. So like, I think you got to see an uptick there to really start moving the needle. And
All right.
to John's point, that showing activity increases, obviously, I think once you get some trade certainty.
Yeah.
All right, let's see. Let's see if we get some certainty, maybe with spring holding. Uh, maybe we'll see something a little bit different. So we will get back together in a month's time and discuss what's happening. Thank you both as always, John and Steve. You can follow John on X at John Pasalis and Steve at Steve Soretsky. The show is at Move Smartly. You can also leave comments for us under our video here on YouTube and keep the conversation going. And we thank you all for listening and watching as usual. See you soon.